Beep.
Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again. There's not going to be a book review this week because I'm currently halfway through St. Josh's amazing biography of H.P. Lovecraft, I Am Providence. It's a book I've been meaning to read for a very long time and I'm loving it. Did you know that Lovecraft was a huge fan of spaghetti and Italian food? Oh, that's so nice. Did you know that he was also virulently racist? You probably did. Everyone knows that. Still, I think this is kind of a book review or at least a recommendation because I'd like to recommend Stuff Every Graduate Should Know by Alyssa Favreau, which is kind of a novelty book. It's a very short and very fun collection of tips and suggestions about everything from doing your taxes to moving houses to looking for a roommate or looking for a job, tailoring your resume. All sorts of information that every every efficient graduate should know, but it's the kind of stuff they don't really teach you in school, whether in high school or university. Hey, I have talked about school-related stuff in the past, tips for English majors, those sorts of things. And finally, at the tender age of 67, I'm almost done with my career as a student, and I think it's a good time to share some of the knowledge and some of the secrets I've learned about this modern life of ours. Some of these tips are going to echo the suggestions Alyssa gives in her book. If you can find this book, by all means get it. It's real fun and it's full of real great insight and secrets and some spreadsheet and some organizational tips. It's going to be very useful to you, especially if you live in the US, Canada, when it comes to the stuff about taxes and such, but it's relevant wherever you live in the world. But some of the tips I'm going to give you contradict certain things Alyssa says. Of course, everyone has a different perspective, and for that reason, some of these things are going to sound real obvious, but they weren't, at least to me, at a certain point in my recent life. So, when you're hunting for a new apartment and you go do some viewings, always, if you can, bring somebody else with you, and always bring a list with you of things you should check. Things like the water pressure in taps and in the shower, whether there's any heating in your room, whether the heating is electric or gas, those sorts of things. Because in my experience, for whatever reason, when you go and view a room or a house, it's a strange psychedelic experience, by virtue of which, as soon as the viewing is done, you realize you can't remember anything about the house, or at least that happened to me plenty of times, and sometimes that's for the best. One of the best places I've ever lived in, during the viewing, I was convinced that it was very small, but then when I ended up choosing it and I moved to it, I realized, oh well, this is actually a real great place. But some other times that doesn't work out as well, and you realize that your new house has some terrible, deadly flaw you hadn't noticed. So again, an extra pair of eyes is very useful in those situations. Also, moves suck. I believe it's Marianne Enriquez in one of the stories in Things We Lost in the Fire. She says that moves, her narrator, I'm an English major, her narrator says that moves are the worst possible thing that can happen to a person after the death of a loved one and the end of a relationship. They are the most stressful thing, and I don't believe that's too much of an exaggeration. The one tip I'm going to give you if you're going to move to a new place is expect that you'll have to move much more stuff than you think. What I mean is, you don't really realize, as long as you're living in a place, you don't really realize how much stuff you accumulate, how many kitchen utensils, how many books, and how many items of clothing, because all your stuff is spread around the house. But when you pack it and it's all in a few cardboard boxes and suitcases, it's going to be a lot of stuff. So plan as if you're going to carry so much more stuff than you are currently thinking. Also, pro tip for people who live abroad but are going to go back home at the end of a certain period, maybe because you're doing your Erasmus year, maybe because you are studying or working abroad for 1, 2, 3 years. Every trip back home and every time a friend from home comes visit you, that's an occasion to get rid of some stuff. maybe some books you've read and you're not going to reread, or maybe some winter clothes if winter is finally over. Bring that stuff home, because you are going to be so much happier at the end of your stay, when you have to move everything back home. Even if it's just a few items of clothes in the few little spaces left in your suitcase when you go back home for Christmas, that might make a difference at the end of your stay. I didn't plan ahead at all when I was doing my Erasmus year in the UK, and at the end of my stay I had to throw some stuff away, very simply put. And I was also one of those Erasmus students who go to the airport, usually that's in June, July, wearing all the items of clothing they own, and with their blankets draped around them, and carrying maybe a pot and a pan in their hand, together with their suitcase. It's not a good sight. When it comes to food and meals, plan ahead, of course. Maybe try to know at the beginning of the week what you plan to cook for the entire week, but be flexible with that stuff, because sometimes you cook something and the leftover is much more than you expected, maybe because you're not really hungry on a given night. Sometimes you're invited out for dinner unexpectedly, and one thing that happened to me a lot when I was doing that Erasmus year was that, sadly enough, I ended up throwing away lots of food because of those reasons, because I actually planned ahead too rigorously, and then I couldn't stick to the meal plan. Also, these guides, these life hack sort of guides, will tell you to plan ahead so that you can only shop, say, once a week, and I'm not too, I don't like that suggestion very much. Also because the zucchini you buy on Sunday fresh are not going to taste great when you cook them on Saturday. They might have survived, but they might also have not. Of course, these kinds of things also depend, of course, whether getting to a supermarket involves a 2-hour drive for you, or whether you have a shop or supermarket very close at hand. In an ideal world, in my ideal world, I would shop at a supermarket once or twice a week, and then every couple of days buy, go to a baker for bread, to a grocer for fruit and vegetables, and maybe to a butcher for meat. But that's expensive, it's time consuming for sure, and according to where you live in the world, especially if you live in the Anglo-Saxon world, those things, grocery stores and bakers, might not exist, or at least not in a conventional non-corporate form. If shopping for food is a pain to you, freezing is always an option. I find that works excellently with bread. If, like me, you like to have bread with every meal, then freezing some bread is great. It thaws very easily, 10 minutes to an hour, depending on whether you are thawing a slice of white bread or a loaf of pugliese bread. You can freeze meat. I don't like to freeze meat very much because you have to plan ahead in order to thaw it in the fridge. Sometimes things go hoary, and when you thaw the meat, it spoils very fast for whatever reason. If you can get your groceries easily, maybe there's a supermarket not too far away from where you live, I personally would recommend to buy meat on the day you're going to eat it. But that's just me. One thing you should keep in the freezer is flour, because it's the same as keeping it in the cupboard, and hopefully that keeps it away from bugs and from those hideous little moths that lay their eggs in flour. Some people keep coffee in the freezer too. I've heard that it spoils the flavor. I wouldn't know, I keep it in jars. Don't put bananas and tomatoes in the fridge, keep them outside the fridge. Eat them fast. If the bananas are all brown and disgusting, bake some banana bread with those. It's the easiest thing. It's not the most luxurious dessert ever, but it's sweet, it's edible. If you are frying things in a pan or in a pot, don't throw your spent oil in the drain, because that's going to clog your pipes. What you should do, if that's what you used to cook was butter, you can wait for it to congeal and then you can wipe it away with a paper towel and throw that in the trash. If it's oil, it's going to be slightly more complicated. You might have to pour it in a jar or in a bottle, if you can manage to do that without making a mess, and throw it away again in the trash. I usually save the old jars, glass jars from jam or pickles and that stuff to use for this reason. If you have lots of oil to throw away because you deep fry things very often, there might be a place in your local area where they take in spent oil to treat it, usually a dump or some place like that. But if it's just every once in a while, you can throw that stuff in the trash. Oh, speaking of pipes and their lovely tendency to burst, if you live in a very cold place and you leave the house for a couple of days, couple of weeks in the winter, you might have to leave the heating on a very low setting, otherwise the water in the pipes might freeze and the pipes might burst. And if you like to cook, that's good for you, but never ever try a recipe for the first time on a night where you're entertaining friends or a date, because in this day and age, online, especially online, you find so many recipes for whatever kind of thing, and all of them are published on very sleek blogs and websites at the bottom of very long interesting articles that are obviously search engine optimized, and they're written by professionals, and they have all these amazing pictures of the food and of this wondrous kitchen where the food is prepared, but half of the times the actual recipes are shit. Sometimes that's a matter of taste. Things a person might like might not be to your liking. Sometimes it's just a matter of recipes being bad. I've seen mushrooms and garlic and lemon in particular put in places where they really shouldn't go. And sometimes, I don't know, things just don't work. That might also be a geographical reason. Maybe you are an Italian who lives in the UK who's reading an American recipe. So your taste might not coincide with the food that's available to you to buy, which might not coincide with the food that's supposed to go in the recipe. Especially with American recipes, one thing I've noticed is that they tend to give you very short cooking times for food. Like some recipes tell you should boil broccoli for 2 minutes. That's like eating it raw. Why would you do that? Or like some recipes tell you to put your chicken in the oven for 5 minutes and it's ready to eat. It's really not. It's going to give you salmonella and you'll die. So yeah, I don't recommend you try to impress people with a recipe that might reasonably go awry. It's much better to stick to even just pasta with tomato sauce or a salad with avocado, tuna, walnuts, couple of ingredients. It's going to be minimal, but it's going to be good to eat. Try those complicated recipes in the solitude of your own time where no one will know your shame. Speaking of cleaning, well, hopefully we're all enlightened people and we clean after ourselves, but one thing I myself tended to underestimate, and I probably still do, is showers, because of course showers is where you go and get clean. They are self-cleaning, aren't they? No, apparently the soap scum, the residues from the soap you use, they are going to create that horrible stratum, especially between the tiles in your shower. That's the hardest shit in the universe to get rid of, so do clean your shower often. If the layer of filth between your tiles starts to get pink, you have waited too long. Speaking of clothes, avoid buying clothes from fast fashion brands. That's mostly for ethical and moral reasons. I'll put a link in the video in the description box to a video by Justine Leconte, a very famous YouTuber, where she explains about the evils of fast fashion, but it's also for monetary reasons, for your own interest. You're going to buy lots of clothes you don't need because they're just so cheap. Those clothes, the quality is terrible, they get ruined extremely fast. It's actually much more convenient to only get a few quality items of clothing and stick to those. You should probably familiarize yourself with the idea of the capsule wardrobe, which is a wardrobe made up of just maybe a dozen, maybe 20 items of clothing for the spring, summer season and the fall, winter season. that you can combine in different ways and that make sense with one another so that you can optimize the clothes you have. You don't have to stick to those plans. You don't have to be a hardcore, to have a hardcore capsule wardrobe where everything goes well with everything else, but familiarize yourself with that idea that it's actually better to have a few quality items of clothing than just buy stuff and accumulate it. But at the same time, do buy yourself stuff. One thing I recommend is you keep track of of your spending, because very often if you don't keep track of all the money you spend on a given month, it's very easy for that stuff to get out of hand. But one thing that I've noticed that happens when people start keeping track of their economies, keeping track of how much they spend, is that they get scared, and for several months they don't buy themselves anything, they don't get any of the luxuries they like, they don't get any of the things they like, and that's bad. I think in the long run that's going to make you miserable. Do get the stuff you enjoy, that's what life's for. Of course, how much stuff you can get depends on your financial situation for obvious reasons. One thing I would recommend, the only thing you should avoid is buying stuff that you don't really need, which sounds obvious, but it's actually a thing I believe lots of us do all the time, especially with books. To me, it also happens sometimes with board games or video games, happens all the time to people with clothes, not as in to those people who own clothes, but as in to everyone when it comes to clothes. You get something that you maybe don't need immediately, but you like it so much and you are sure that you're going to wear it or to play it or read it someday, and then you end up with an entire shelf of books that you are absolutely going to read, but not really in the immediate future, or with games for 8+ players but you only have 2 friends, or with a jeans jacket that I'm not going to wear because I don't plan to fight any train robber or chase any escaped cattle anytime soon. Other than that, if it's a book you're going to read reasonably soon, if it's a game that's going to be played, if it's a jacket that you are going to wear next Saturday, do get it, you deserve it. Finally, look into opportunities for volunteering in your local community. I used to think that volunteering was something that saints did, but actually no, there are, when you start looking into it, especially if you live in or close to a big city, there are just so many opportunities in all different areas. Maybe you can volunteer at a local community center where classes are held, or you can man the counter in a charity shop, or you can volunteer in a museum or help the homeless. There's just so much stuff, and it's all going to make you feel better about yourself, obviously. It's going to give you some experience that will boost your CV, and it's going to be great. I volunteer in a local bookstore and it's amazing. I get to handle so many books. I get first picks on the stuff that's donated. If the shop is quiet and no one's around, I take a book off the shelf and I read it behind the counter. You know, it's great stuff. I'm sure there's something for all of you. And these, I guess, are my suggestions. This is all the knowledge I've acquired that doesn't relate to Michael Chabon books in the last 20-something years of my life. Again, I'm well aware that some of this stuff is going to sound obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to me at certain points in my recent life. Do let me know about some other things that you believe people should know when they leave their studies, when they graduate from college or high school too, but that it's not generally taught to them by the system. And let me know about all what I've said in the video, whether you agree, whether you disagree. I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with some of these points. It makes sense. They might not make much sense to you according to your situation or the place where you live. Let's discuss this stuff in the comments. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye, guys.